Hi students, once again welcome you in this session Respiration in Organisms. Students, today we are going to start with mechanism of breathing. In our previous lecture we have already learned about what is breathing, that is inhaling and exhaling air. So basically we have to know what exactly happens during inhalation or exhalation. So what do we mean by inhalation? It means inhaling air which is rich in oxygen. And what is exhalation? Exhaling air or expelling out air which is rich in carbon dioxide. So basically these are the two steps involved in breathing mechanism in human beings. So let us see with the activity what happens during inhalation and exhalation. First we'll have to see the different organs which is involved in this breathing process. The dome shaped organs, which is a muscular organ which is called diaphragm, and it is located in between the chest cavity and abdominal cavity. And here this is nasal cavity through which we inhale air. And here the pipe like structure which is called windpipe that helps to take air into the lungs. And then the white bony structure which is called rib cage. In that rib cage the lungs are protected and enclosed, and the lungs which is the main organ of our respiratory system. Now we'll have to see with the experiment how mechanism of breathing taken place. So here the experiment to show the activity and what are the different materials which are required to show this activity. The first material is a bell jar, a glass jar. Then we'll have to take a Y-shaped tube, a wooden cork, a rubber sheet, thin rubber sheet, and lastly two deflated balloons. Now we'll have to set up this experiment like this. Fix up the Y-shaped glass tube with the balloon in the bell jar. Then tie the thin rubber sheet around the bottom of the bell jar with the string. This setup is actually comparable to the respiratory system in man. The bell jar is just like the chest cavity of the human being and the balloons to the lungs. And the rubber sheet is represent the diaphragm. So let us start the activity. Now you pull the rubber sheet down, you will see that the balloons get inflated. And when you push the rubber sheet upwards or released, you will see the balloon collapsed. So how do the balloons get inflated and deflated? When we pull and push the rubber sheet. So now let us understand how this happens. So students, when we pull the rubber sheet outwards, the space inside the bottle increases and the air inside the bottle become lighter, so the dense air rushes to fill the jar and the balloon gets inflated. Understand? And when we push the rubber sheets upwards, the space in the jar gets reduced and the pressure increases. So this pushes the air out of the balloons and the balloon gets deflated. Now let us see how this happens or correlate with the breathing mechanism or breathing system in human beings. The bottle is like a human body. There is empty space or a cavity inside the body which is filled with air called chest cavity or body cavity. The rubber sheet is actually acts as a diaphragm. The Y-shaped tube is a trachea and bronchi, and the balloons are like lungs which are enclosed in chest cavity. So now let us see what happens in our body during this process, that is inhalation and exhalation. So now let us see what happens in our body. You can see in this picture, one is for inhalation and the other one is for exhalation. So what happens during inhalation first? We inhale air. through the nostril. Okay, through the nostril, when we inhale the air, the diaphragm they moves downwards. Become the as we know that diaphragm is a dome shape, or inhale air, that diaphragm gets in flattened, and the ribs they moves outwards and upwards. The ribs they move outwards and upwards. Lungs get expand. Lungs जो है वो expand कर जाता है. Then what happens? The chest cavity, the cavity is there where the lungs are located. The volume of the chest cavity, that means the space of the chest cavity, increases and air pressure decreases, so that it becomes more spacious. So the dense air outside the body, they rushes to fill the lungs or rushes to fill the chest cavity. That is exactly happens during inhalation. Understand? Then what happens in exhalation? When we exhale air, that means the carbon dioxide rich air, when we exhale out, what happens during that? When we exhale air, the ribs they move inwards and downwards, and the diaphragm moves upwards. That means they relaxed and become their own position, and the lungs they also relaxed. So what happens inside the chest cavity? The air pressure increases and the volume of chest cavity, that is space of chest cavity, decreases, so that the air expelled out through the lungs by nostril. That is happens during exhalation. Let us see a difference between inhalation and exhalation. So now, what happens during inhalation? Once again I am repeating. The ribs moves upwards and outwards, and the diaphragm they moves downwards. And what about the lungs? The lungs get expanded and the volume of chest cavity increases, and air pressure inside the chest cavity decreases. So the dense air outside the body they rushes to fill the lungs or the chest cavity. That is how inhalation taken place. Now what about exhalation? In exhalation, the ribs moves downwards and inwards when you exhale air, and then the diaphragm moves upwards. That means they come into their relaxed position. Then lungs also get relaxed. Why these lungs get relaxed? Because the volume of chest cavity decreases. That means the space decreases, reduced, and then the air pressure increases, so that air is now dense inside the chest cavity. So now this air must have to expelled out. So the air expelled out through the lungs by nostril. That is what happens in inhalation and exhalation. So student, I hope you understand what is the mechanism of breathing. So go through this lecture and try to understand what is mechanism of breathing. Thank you students.